my guest is Bob Hostetler.
And I think both Shakespeare and the Bible, they're art forms. And so art ought to make us look inward.
Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today my guest is Bob Hostetler, and he is a very special friend. So good to have you, Bob.
Thank you, Jeanne. It's a joy to see you again, to be with you.
This just fascinated me when I saw the Bard and the Bible. So this is basically Shakespeare meets the Bible in a devotional. Is that correct?
Right, and particularly the King James Version of the Bible, because it's always been a fascination of mine how the works of William Shakespeare and the King James Version of the Bible were both created not only in the same period, and not only, at least if you consider Shakespeare's greatest works, in the same decade, but in the same country, in the same city, just a stone's throw from each other, because Shakespeare's Southwark digs in London were just across the Thames from where the King James translators were working. And there are so many parallels and contrasts between the two that this was a joy to write.
Oh, I bet it was. So I noticed you said Southwark properly. Have you been over to London?
Just once, but I'm a little bit of an Anglophile too. I love the English, I love the English language,
Shakespeare's Languages. I know a lot of people, they might have studied it in high school and, it's so hard, I don't understand it, but it's kind of like the King James Bible. The more you read it, the easier it is to understand.
It is, and in fact, when I first fell in love with Shakespeare was when I was in college taking an intro to Shakespeare course, and I looked around at the other students in the room with amazement because they weren't. I'm sure it was Romeo and Juliet that we started with, and they didn't understand hardly any of it. Right now, why is this so hard for them? That's the thought that's going. And then it dawned on me, I was raised on the King James Version of the Bible. And so those cadences, some of those words, and just the way of speaking, the art and the beauty of it was all part of that's how I heard. And so it was no stretch at all for me to jump right into the Shakespeare. But I think most people have, even those who have read Shakespeare or been forced to read Shakespeare, have an image of both it and the King James Version that it's, like you said, that it's hard to understand, that it's boring, all that sort of thing. But it's really not, just a little bit of transition that a person makes in their mind. And one of the things that I tried to do in The Bard and the Bible was to help the reader make that transition. And just in short snatches and snippets, it's totally accessible.
Yeah. Well, you have here, on each day, you've got a little bit from one of Shakespeare's plays, and then something from the Bible, and then you have your write-up about it, and then you have a little thing at the bottom. What are these different things at the bottom?
Those are there's 6 different categories of factoids, I would call them, and the titles of each are actually taken from a work of Shakespeare, like the poet and player. Well, that was a phrase that Shakespeare used in one of his plays. And of course, when the factoid has to do with the specific words, because Shakespeare invented many, many words, it's the title of that little factoid is Words, Words, Words from Hamlet. And so it's a short quote from one of Shakespeare's works. So not only his 38 plays by my count, and sonnets, but also some of his longer poems, and then a verse from the King James Version, and then the selection, and then those factoids.
So do you think this would be something that like homeschoolers or other Christian schools or other people in school could use?
Oh, I hope so. I hope that it will be, just like the book itself, that it will bring together different audiences. For example, obviously those who love the Bible already, or those who are partial to the King James Version, to the beauty of that language, or those who are fans of Shakespeare. I hope that folks who love Shakespeare, but maybe have never considered a commitment to Christ, or don't go to church, that they might pick it up, that they might read it and be influenced by it as well as homeschoolers, English teachers and classes and professors and so on. I hope that it'll be a wide cross-section of people enjoying this book.
I just have to show a picture that was part of the information I got from your publicist. This is Bob as Shakespeare.
Well, it's all Shakespeare. It's just my face superimposed, my face on. I think it makes a compelling and kind of creepy image myself. But actually, one of the things I want to do with this book is I'm in the market for an authentic, theatrical Shakespeare costume, complete with the wig and the beard and mustache, because I hope to go to Renaissance fairs to introduce people to the book, to libraries, to schools, and so on. So I'm shopping that right now, but it's a little harder than it might seem, because Shakespeare, in his day, you couldn't just wear any clothes that you wanted to. By law, Shakespeare was not allowed to wear, for example, scarlet or purple. Those colors were not in his wardrobe because he was a commoner. He was not noble,
were reserved for the
royalty and the nobility to wear those colors. So it's kind of interesting. He would have worn either black or brown, very likely.
Oh,
Yeah.
how boring.
That's why we've got purple on the cover, just to get back at that. Yeah, just lawbreakers.
Was that really intentional?
No, actually, the cover was initially kind of earth tones, orange and brown kind of a thing, but then we went to the purple and thought that really pops.
Yeah,
so,
it's nice. It's nice. Well, Shakespeare, in a lot of his plays, got kind of bawdy. I'm assuming that you didn't include those kinds of...
Right. No, in the introduction, we mentioned that he had, because he was an entertainer, he was a player and a playwright, and so he was very much a man of his age, though he became a man for all ages, to steal a phrase. But yeah, there were bawdy scenes, but the thing that I think a lot of people miss is that even though he catered to the theater-going audiences of his day, and in fact in his plays to the various, because London and England at that time were a very class-driven society. And so careful inspection of his plays, you can see that he wrote for the lower classes, some of that bawdy humor especially, but he also wrote for the upper classes. And in fact, some of his plays, people think that he only wrote poetry. Some of his plays are all verse, like Richard II. But that's because when Shakespeare wrote a king or a prince or a princess, the royalty spoke in verse. Common people like him spoke in prose. Okay. And so in those plays where the cast is exclusively or almost exclusively royalty, they're all verse. But other plays are mixtures, because the royalty spoke in verse, the nobility spoke in verse, but the commoners spoke in prose. And so I think that's just fascinating. But we didn't feature the bawdy parts, though we do acknowledge that he wasn't always the loftiest language. But what many people miss is that his worldview and the themes of his play were what we would consider today a thoroughly Christian worldview. In fact, he turned on its head some of the ideas of Elizabethan and Jacobean England, because he was pushing gently, because he didn't want to lose his audience, but pushing back against some of those assumptions.
And one of the things that he and the Bible have in common, his work and the Bible have in common, is the thorough understanding of human foibles and weaknesses, and then also human dignity.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think if we were to run into Shakespeare in church on Sunday, he had to go to church. We know he went to church regularly because it was required by law in his day. But he knew his Bible better than any of us. Even the most knowledgeable pastor out there, Shakespeare knew it better, I'm pretty confident. And so he was able to write lines, probably some of them intentionally echoing Scripture, but others just because that was part of his mind, the way he thought. So when he has Hamlet say, "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty," and then a line later, "How like an angel," to me that just resonates with the psalmist David's, "What is man, that thou art mindful of him, or the Son of Man, that thou visitest him? Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with glory." And so he lived and breathed the cadences of Scripture in a way that I think many of us don't.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I love his writing so much. And he's hilarious.
So funny.
Oh my goodness.
So funny. Even in the tragedies, even in the histories, the humor he must have been a fun guy to sit down with, because the humor is just all through it.
Yeah. And so you're taking what he said and applying it to Scripture, and he took Scripture and applied it to what he said. It's kind of neat that it's coming full circle.
It is.
In your book.
It is. And, this year, particularly 400 years this year after his death, Shakespeare is cool again, and so it is coming around full circle. But it's just, to me, it's sometimes correspondences between Shakespeare and Scripture. Sometimes it's contrasts too, because his characters, one of the things he did, one of the ways he changed theater in his day was that rather than melodrama, he wrote drama. His characters were complex, and one of the ways that he avoided the censors, he never got in trouble with the law like some others, like Christopher Marlowe did, was because he could present both sides of an argument compellingly and have the audience wrestling with issues that in other playwrights' hands were just propaganda.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think of Hamlet and just the way the decisions he made, and if he had just made one choice differently, then everything would have turned out so different. I don't know. It's just, and then you look at yourself. You're reading those plays, and you look at yourself, and you think, now the kind of choices that I'm about to make on this, am I making a mistake too?
And because art, and I think both Shakespeare and the Bible, they're art forms, and so art ought to make us look inward and examine ourselves and identify with what we see or hear, whether on the stage or on the page. It ought to create introspection.
And his was true art.
Beautiful art.
And the Bible is incredible art. So where can people find you online if they want to know more about your book or you? Yeah,
this book has its own URL. It's bardandbible.com.
Okay.
So that'll take you right to it. And then my website that has all my books and speaking engagements and so on is just my name, bobhostetler.com.
Okay. Thank you so much for being our
Jeanne,
guest.
It's great to be with you. It's always great to talk to you.